welcome to our Mealtime Challenges presentation. This is the first year we're doing this. It just seems to be a huge area of need. Every year we see more and more picky eaters and families who are really stressed out about, their child not having a large repertoire of foods, and it's really important to work on that and keep mealtime happy and lower stress. So we decided to put this training together for you guys. I'm Lavery. I'm one of the occupational therapists working with early childhood special education.
And I'm Rosa. I'm also an occupational therapist. I work with Lauren. I'm also a mother of 3 boys, and my 2 oldest boys have ADHD. Likely the 3rd one does too. And related to that, just some sensory issues, and we've had kind of our challenges at home with picky eating too.
Yeah, and so this presentation, there are a lot of slides in our PowerPoint, so I hope it doesn't feel too rushed in the beginning. Rosa and I, we go to a lot of continuing education courses, and what we find is so often you go to a course and they spend so much time describing the problem and then not as much time on intervention, and that's really frustrating. We don't want that to happen to you. So the beginning of this presentation, we will go through a little bit faster. Of course, stop us if you have questions or if you want to slow down on anything, and then so that we can spend a little more time toward the end. Okay?
Yeah, and on that note, I wanted to just get a sense from everyone what kind of the biggest challenges or what you would like to take home or learn today. Kind of write it down, because that'll kind of help guide us where we focus on throughout the PowerPoint to make sure we're keeping it relevant. So if people want to just raise their hand or just call it out. Yes?
Mostly just, he, he's picky, but he doesn't always eat. Like, it's not always like like he'll go a while without eating, and then, so we try to find things that we feel like he'll eat.
And that can be kind of a moving target?
No, it becomes easier when we do that, but it's the same things, So it's not very,
You feel like, okay.
And it's not unhealthy. It's not like we're giving him just cookies and stuff, but he's just not, he doesn't have much of a...
Not much of an appetite, or
Right.
seems inconsistent. Okay, anyone else?
Harmony has a feeding disorder, and so she's down to 3 things. If we get her up to 5, we're throwing a party. If we get her up to 7, we feel like we've hit the jackpot. But she keeps going back down to 1. And so we got her up to eating grapes and strawberries and a couple other things, and then she got sick and she went straight back down to 1.
Oh, yeah.
And so for us, it's a real challenge, 1, to get her to eat anything, 2, to initiate new foods, because she's autistic, and then she has feeding disorder, and she's ADHD. It's almost impossible.
And the setbacks are really scary when your child only has a few foods they eat. To lose a food is a big deal.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Love it if Jacob were more open to eating different textures and not fixating on certain textures.
Some of these frame is what we want, and some of them what the problem is. That works. Okay.
We have one more hand too, Rosa.
Yeah.
Oh, ours is texture-based too, so it's more just wet types of foods that you won't even touch, so.
Wet texture.
Welcome. Come on in.
I'd also say is just getting him to try anything new. Because he usually
There's
has
several spots up here in the front.
familiar set that's
Mike.
okay, and the rest is just denied.
Okay, great. And just so you know, you guys have 3 handouts in front of you. The PowerPoint, in case you want to jot down notes on this. You'll have this pink sheet is a parent action sheet. So if you have an idea, like as we go through the presentation, of something you want to try at home, jot it down here. We also will stop a few times during the presentation and jot a few things down. So that's your action sheet. Oh yes, pens are over here. And also, does anybody want like a hard surface to write on? Because we have books. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough clipboards for this group. Does anybody else need a pen? Yeah, here we go. Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't have enough clipboards for this group.
Going over portions?
Thank you. Yes, we are.
Anybody else?
I was just curious, because it's so small that you can't read what it
Yes,
says.
yeah.
So we will have it up here.
Yeah.
We can print that slide off afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody want hard surface to write on? Are we good kind of managing that?
There we go.
All right. And then the last thing you're going to have is the green sheet, which is the food chaining worksheet. So this is an activity we're all going to do together after we describe what food chaining is. Okay.
Try to color code it so it would be easy to find. That's also frustrating when you're shuffling through paper trying to find the right one.
Okay. So thank you for sharing some of your concerns. We'll get right into it then. So some fun facts for you guys. Picky eating is really common, even in typical children. Up to 25%, 26% of the kids all are picky at one point in their lives. This percentage really increases with our special needs population. Another thing to kind of consider is toddlers in preschool. So this age group that we're working with, it's very normal for them to be in this time of their lives where they're learning to assert their independence. And with this age group, that really has to do with what goes in their body and what goes out. So feeding and potty training, that's like their way of being independent. So that's something that we run into. And then also, just in terms of hunger and appetite, not everybody knows this, but babies grow very, very quickly up until 12 months. They're eating pretty ravenously and pretty much whatever you give them. That growth does slow down at 12 months of age, and it slows way down at about 2 years. So we're dealing with toddlers and 3-year-olds. We do expect that drop in appetite. So if you're wondering, why isn't my child as hungry as they were maybe 6 months ago, looking at their age, it's kind of a good thing to know.
I always smile when I see these pictures, right? Ideally, or what you would like to see. That's never what that looks like at my house, but this is sort of something to strive for, right? That your child's sitting down and having a small meal.
Yeah, replace the word
Up to
normal with
5 times.
ideal. 15 to 30 minutes is a long time, especially for kids with special needs. But this is, for all kids, yeah. But it is something what we're shooting for. Okay, so this is the portion sizes slide, and if you want a bigger copy, we can print this out later. Just the point of this slide being, portion sizes are pretty small. When you're looking at a 1 to 3-year-old, a half an egg would be like the protein. So just kind of keeping that in mind, having that expectation for how much they're going to eat, and having that be kind of realistic to their age group is important. A quarter of a cup of cooked veggies, that's plenty. Doesn't have to be a whole plate.
That seems less than what I thought. A lot less.
I think we often can give our kids more volume than, and sometimes the impact of that is they can feel a little overwhelmed by how much that is. So I do that myself as a mom often, put too much food in, but something to keep in mind.
Okay.
Pretty much fair, you're gonna lose half of that.
You're gonna lose half of that?
Yeah, you're gonna lose half of that.
But
Yeah, that's true.
that's
And
true.
also, there's
So,
no problem
adjust
with
for that.
putting a small amount on the plate and then working on the skill of asking for more, right? You can always get more.
More broccoli, that'd be great.
Yeah, of their preferred foods probably at first. Okay.
So, something else we want to touch on briefly before we jump into kind of the meat and potatoes of it is kind of distinguishing a little between kind of typical typical picky eating and kind of more of the problem eating, right? And I think that's important only because when we're kind of more in this problem eating of, as Lauren said, a lot of kids move through a picky eating phase, right? Where they maybe have 30 or less foods, they're maybe had a food they enjoyed and they're not wanting to eat it, but they'll go back to it after a while, right? So we see this very typically across all kids. When you have kids that are under 20 kids, maybe they're had a food they liked and they're not going to try it for another year. When we see kind of that intensity there, that's telling us we need to get some help and some support from other people. Because, you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
We know this, but some of the problems that can result, right? Not just not holding the growth curve, but some of the vitamin deficiencies and growth problems that can happen. And then also, I think it's important to realize that your quality of life matters. If mealtime is really stressful, that's time to get help. Right? We don't have to wait for things to get more extreme.
Okay, so some common myths about eating. How many of you have heard this one? Oh, if he's hungry, he'll eat. It's like the classic thing you hear from people who don't work with children with special needs. So if you were very, very, very thirsty and you were in the desert, all you had to drink was antifreeze. You're not going to drink the antifreeze because you're not recognizing that as something that is drinkable. So this is like our kids. Some of them, they truly will see certain foods and really not see them as safe to eat or appropriate to eat. And so therefore, they're not going to eat them even if they're hungry. Another thing too is not eating for long periods of time can actually make people feel less hungry and less like they need to eat. So sometimes those cues for hunger can kind of go away. Having said that, doesn't mean that you just want to give your child exactly what he wants at every meal, especially if it's high calorie. If you have a child who loves whole milk or Ensure and you're giving them, they're going to feel very full from their high interest food and then not have quite that appetite to explore anything else. So it's kind of just this balance to get.
So this is my favorite common myth. Eating is easy, right? And I think for those of us for whom it's not an issue, it feels like you kind of put on your plate and you eat it and you make some decisions about what you eat. And it can be enjoyable and lovely and social. But eating really requires coordination across basically every system in your body. Motorically, in terms of, muscles and keeping yourself upright and the core control, and then everything that happens in your mouth is very, very complex. So just important to kind of say that's not true, and our kids who are having issues, they're real issues, right? Just to validate that.
Okay, another common myth is that the end-all be-all is like the only way to measure success is to get your child to put that food in their mouth that they don't like, chew it and swallow it. But there in reality are a lot of little steps along the way that can be considered successes, especially for children who are very, very picky. I mean, there are children who cannot tolerate certain textures or smells in the room, on their plate. So there are different steps to eating, and we'll go over this a little bit later in the presentation of all the different kind of things that a child has to go through mentally before they're willing to put that food in their mouth and before they're willing to chew it and swallow it. So just keeping that in mind, that there's a lot of ways to be successful, and then ultimately, of course, the goal is to eat the food, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a long road, and so just celebrating those successes along the way.
So before we look at picky eating more specifically, we want to run through a couple of other factors to consider. And oftentimes, of course, your kid is dealing with a number of these, right? So they're inactive. We want to look at, are there any medical problems to kind of consider, right, in terms of cardiac, respiratory, GI. Oftentimes the kids have allergies or they're blocked up or constipated. That's all going to affect how comfortable they are. It's going to affect their appetite. All of that's really related. Sleep problems. Kids in the ages of our kiddos need between 10 to 13 hours of sleep a night and a nap, which is hard to fit in, right, with our daily lives. And a lot of our kids have some sleep issues too, right? 3 boys with sleep apnea. And then just being aware, of course, if your child is on medication that's suppressing their appetite. So these are all the other pieces we're dealing with.
Okay, so aside from medical problems, we also kind of need to rule out, is it an actual motor problem? Like, can my child not move his mouth in the correct ways? So there are a lot of motor skills involved in eating. You have to be able to close your lips. You have to be able to bite with your front teeth, chew with your molars, eventually getting that rotary true where you can move your teeth kind of side to side. Your tongue has to be quite coordinated to shape the food into a little ball called a bolus that you have to swallow. And so there are a lot of motor skills involved, and ironically, the way you work on those skills is to eat. It's very hard to teach a child to chew and swallow in any other way, really. So some motor problems that we see quite a bit, low muscle tone. Sometimes kids with very low muscle tone, you'll know who these kids are because they kind of have a posture like this with their chin sticking out and their mouth open. So those kind of kids can often fatigue quite a bit, so they might even avoid foods that require a lot of chewing. They might have a hard time coordinating their tongue. High muscle tone kids also really hard, like cerebral palsy, things like that. Those present its own issues with that. Oral motor inexperience, this could be a child who's maybe not been orally fed for many months. Maybe they've had a G-tube and they've relied on that completely. So they haven't had a chance to build those skills and the strength. And then also for kids with just general challenges, coordination, because you have to be able to coordinate sucking, swallowing, and breathing in the correct order in order to chew and swallow and breathe at the same time. Okay, so another thing to rule out is aspiration. Aspiration is really, it can be really dangerous. It's when food goes through the vocal cords and actually gets into the lungs. Lungs like to not be too wet, and if you have a child who's aspirating frequently, they are going to get sick a lot. They might get pneumonia over and over and over again. That's one way to know if your child's aspirating. It's not always obvious, so it's something where you have to kind of be a little bit of a detective, and obviously something, if you're worried about aspiration, talking to your doctor is a good idea, because it can be dangerous. Wet vocal quality, sometimes kids will talk and their voice sounds a little bit wet and like a little gravelly, and getting common, respiratory illnesses frequently over and over again. If you suspect aspiration, talk to your doctor. They may need to order a swallow study and just see when your child's swallowing, is anything getting into the lungs.
We have had some cases of just working with a family, a child who was otherwise neurotypical, who did have some issues with aspirating and swallowing, which we would not have suspected at first seeing the kid, right? So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Are they swallowing safely? Is that feeling safe to them?
Yeah, and then this next slide is really just to please all the speech therapists out there, because it's a really common misconception that aspiration is the same as choking or penetration. They're different. Penetration is just when food gets through your vocal cords a little bit. It's not going into your lungs. It's just going to cause some kind of discomfort. It's not really that dangerous. And then choking is obviously a different, that's when the food gets caught in your airway and you can't get air. If your child is choking a lot, probably good to talk to your doctor about, sometimes kids have smaller than average oral structures. Good to kind of just look at that just in case.
All right, so we're gonna take a quick moment, pull out our pink sheet, right?
I think we're going to do that after we talk about the environment.
Do we wanna do motor medical now?
Oh, yeah, motor medical. Yeah.
So we just want a whole bunch of information. Some of it may be relevant to you, some of it may not. We just wanted to kind of rule out some things that can have an impact and some things we don't think about. So if you wanted to take a quick moment, jot anything down at the top there, the motor medical. We'll kind of work through this as we go through the presentation.
Just if off the bat, if anything kind of rang a bell with you, like, oh, this is something I want to think about or ask my doctor about, write it down up there.
If there are any questions, you can come around.
I know.
It's so good to see you. This is a nice surprise.
That's right, buddy.
Okay.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
In going over everything that you just went over, I mean, Harmony has had, she's had colon issues since she was a kid, so a lot of digestive issues. And so constipation has always been a big thing.
Yeah.
But for her, she actually likes to cook. She likes to cook, touch foods. She doesn't have a problem with serving food. She just doesn't like eating food.
She's doing all those steps, right, of interacting with the food.
Yeah. It's probably the biggest jump, right, from getting to that. I'm happy to interact with it, but put it in my mouth, so.
Oh yeah, she's fine with feeding everybody else. She just doesn't want
Yeah.
to eat
I can
herself.
see that with
And we'll talk
her.
more toward the end about getting
that.
that food closer and closer to the mouth, so kissing your food goodbye and putting it in a bowl. Now it's at least touching your mouth, it's close to your nose, you're getting more of the sensory properties, and you might be kissing food goodbye for a few minutes before anything happens, so we will get to that. Okay, so we've ruled out medical motor problems, we've kind of ruled out aspiration, so the next thing is we're going to talk about, what else could it be? Why is mealtime so hard? So we're going to talk about environmental factors, behavioral factors, and then sensory factors. So for environmental factors, let's see, and this is not to guilt trip anybody, this slide, there's just a study done back in 2004 just showing picky eating and just some interesting findings that first child of the family is more likely to have feeding challenges. Not really sure why, perhaps just less peer modeling, we don't know.
We have seen to interject kids, families doing a wonderful job supporting them. When they come to a classroom and they have other kids eating the same food, it's like, oh, that's what you wanted me to do. Somehow that model, having a friend do it that's the same age, can just be more impactful. So it doesn't mean we're doing anything wrong. It just means other kids are.
Peer modeling is very powerful, yeah. Children feeding challenges are less likely to be fed at a table, and then also life events could be associated with feeding issues. So remember, when kids want to assert their power, they only really have power over what goes in their mouth, what goes out of their body, and so anything like a death in the family, moving addresses, for some reason young age of the parent, I haven't experienced that, but that was on there, and I would anecdotally add things like a new baby. Those can all be things, even people when a lot of company comes to town and all of a sudden this quiet household is bustling with new people, expect to have maybe some setbacks in the area of feeding and potty training, and have that kind of empathy for them.
Yeah. We moved about 9 months back, and my 6-year-old, who has been a better eater now, we've gone through rough periods, kind of, he had a period where he wanted to kind of eat rice and ketchup again, which was really hard for me to see. And it was like, okay, I'm not going to get in the power struggle over this. I know we've just had this really intense move, but we are going to kind of continue to keep our routine. You're going to keep having, you know, I kind of knew how to do that dance with him a little bit, but it was still, I'm gonna be honest, really stressful to see him kind of move back to eating rice and ketchup for dinner. So yeah, be aware that that's going to happen. It doesn't mean you're always going to stay there, right? As long as you're getting some movement and so,
Yeah, setbacks are just temporary, and yeah, exactly.
All right, so looking at environmental and home factors, you guys have heard the phrase grazing, right? I feel like that's how our kids want to eat nowadays, right? Snacks all day long. And it's certainly, if your kid does graze, that is just, it's kind of what we do nowadays. But some of the concerns around it is that kids, when they're eating small amounts of food throughout the whole day, they're not getting that full kind of hunger and satiation cycle that we want kids to get to really organize their eating, right? So again, it's kind of a sign of the times. It's what kids often do, but especially if those snacks are sugary, it's suppressing the appetite, right? Because sugar does that. So as soon as they eat a little bit, they're like, okay, I'm fine, I'm full. But then they want to eat again in like an hour or a little more than that. So keep that in mind. We certainly work with families where that's an issue. And we just work on really slowly increasing the time between when they're eating, right? And trying to work it up to like 2 hours. So
it's less to do with the portions and more to do with the time between. Because I noticed the portions were really small, so it's not like we're giving him a lot to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's
if
the time in between.
Time in between.
You really want to have enough time that he's actually really feeling that hunger and tuning into that hunger, which can be hard for some of our kiddos.
And what's the importance of coming to the table and working on that skill, even separately? You know, that really is an important thing, because once kids can learn, this is the table, this is where I eat, then like this kind of situational routine based.
We can build a routine.
Yes.
When they're at the table. That's a really good point. Yeah. And a lot of our kids really like those routines of, okay, this is what I do here.
Yeah, and then looking at the table where your child is sitting, sometimes we have, kids we work with who they're not processing language and words very well yet, and to have, the 6 o'clock news on really loud, that's going to be very distracting and a lot of sensory input that maybe they can't process when eating is already hard enough. Mm-hmm. So just being mindful, auditory distractions, visual distractions, having too many things on the table. Good to kind of start with a nice clear table.
Ideally, right?
Ideally.
We won't look at the table right now. But yeah, it's true. Information that for us is okay and we can process and kind of shed it out. For a kid, it might just be so much, and they don't always have the language to tell us that. And the key, something that I think is really important to think about is when we're in fight or flight, right, like a little stressed out, and our body's ready to it's in a defensive mode, right, because there's just a lot of stimuli, a lot of things going on. We're in the opposite of rest and digest, right? So our appetite's suppressed. We don't want to eat. And when someone's trying to push us to eat or encourage us to eat, and there's all this information going on, and we're not in a place where we're hungry, that's making it more and more of a negative thing, right? Super tough, but we see it happen. It's not because anyone's doing anything wrong. We want our kids to eat, but then they're getting kind of in this negative cycle. So I love this visual. If you were a child, which one of these plates would you like to eat off of?
The right.
To flip it around, because the right. Yeah, and so what about that is better? It's not a trick question.
It's not touching each other.
They're not touching each other, right? The portion's a little smaller, more clear. There's 4 foods on there.
And they can choose which one they want.
They can choose which one they want.
There's
Exactly.
less of the food on there, so it's less overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah, that's huge.
So that would be a good meal then. You just give him that, have him sit at the table, he eats that, or eats most of it or whatever. That's a good, that'd be a good day. That'd be good.
I think it's a great goal, kind of depending on where your kid's at. I can say that I've heard the rule of thumb of a tablespoon per food group. So, let's say your child's 2 years old, then you want to think of 2 tablespoons per vegetable, 2 tablespoons per protein.
So about that amount?
Yeah, about that amount.
And do that 4 to 5 times a day?
Well, I mean, the
3 to
snacks
4
could be
times,
smaller.
whatever,
Yeah, the snacks could be, smaller. So we have a child right now in the community who was really just kind of having a really hard time at lunchtime, throwing spaghetti, really having a meltdown, right? And the teachers were great detectives. We made some small changes, and it hasn't been magic, but it's been helpful. And the changes are, we didn't want to exclude him from the rest of the kids, but there was so much chaos of noise and sound and talking that it was a lot for him. And he couldn't tell us, right? So he just looks like he's being silly, but he's overwhelmed. So we moved him to a smaller table with 2 other calm peers. His teachers did that. They're wonderful. We gave him a divided plate. And we made sure he has 2 foods that he loves and then 1 food that's a little challenging out there. And all of a sudden you just see his body language. Instead of up here, right, a little bit in fight or flight, a lot in fight or flight, he's ready to try some food, right? It's not magic, we have things to work on, but small changes can make a big difference.
Well, my son's at preschool. They told me that he does better when he eats with the kids. So she puts them all at different tables. And he seems to be okay with that. He'll sit down with them because he's watching them do it.
Yes, yeah.
So he's like, okay, this is what we do.
Yep.
Got a little container, I pull out my food, whatever.
Perfect, and so for him, eating with his peers and watching them really works, and that's great.
The magic of peer modeling. Another environmental factor to think about is positioning. So imagine you're going out to a restaurant and you're given stools with no back support and your legs are dangling, your feet aren't touching anything. It's not going to be a very enjoyable meal. You're probably not going to stay very long at the restaurant. You're just going to probably get out of there pretty soon. So imagine, our kids who have their muscles are even less developed than ours and their core is less developed than ours. Proper positioning is really important. You want to have the back supported, hips at 90 degrees, knees at 90 degrees. You want to have their feet resting on something, either the floor or some kind of foot block so that they're planted. This is also a good trick for potty training. Sometimes kids do better when their feet are on a little stool when they're sitting on the potty because otherwise they feel like they're going to fall off and it can be kind of a scary experience. So positioning is good. Also, the other thing too is because of all the motor skills involved in eating, having good alignment in your body and having, as opposed to the low tone, chin out this way, the nice proper alignment with the chin tuck, and chin tuck helps with swallowing, everything, better alignment, the jaw's in better alignment, so eating's going to be a lot easier. Another thing to note with positioning, this is generally the rule of thumb for most kids. We do have some kids who do a little better when they get a little movement in. So sometimes some of our kids just, they need to move more than our average kiddo. And so being mindful of that. Some kids maybe need to do some obstacle courses before they come to the table, or even just having like a little, like an air cushion or something, like you could blow up a beach ball, not all the way, but having them sit on, I know we just told you they have to be stable, but some kids having been on an unstable surface helps kind of activate their core, and it kind of can help them just feel more regulated. Another way to kind of get kids that movement that they need while sitting at the table would be maybe to put out a piece of paper and some markers so they can kind of go back and forth between eating and then getting a little movement by drawing. And that's worked for some of our kids too. And then your eating surface should be between the chest and the belly button. That should be the proper spot for it. Incorrect positioning, so this little boy here, he's not going to sit very long at this table because his feet are not touching the floor. You want your child's knees to be hanging over the edge of the chair, and you want those feet touching something. So all of these are incorrect positionings. There are some products out there. Of course, you don't have to buy anything fancy. This is something that can be figured out without special equipment, but here are some examples of chairs that have the foot support and back support. So the picture on the left of this little boy, what is wrong with this picture? Why is this not the best positioning for him? Anybody have a guess?
No back support, and his legs not firm, so digesting is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. No back support, and his knees are not hanging over the chair. His feet don't have anywhere to go. So he's really, his brain is telling his body how to. Falling, perhaps, yeah. And so his brain has to work really hard to keep his body upright when his brain really should be just focused on eating his meal and all the other things that happen at mealtime, social interaction, learning how to use utensils, big stuff.
His arms, I would say, it's maybe a little high, not terrible, but that's something else to kind of keep in mind, right? Kind of what that level is at.
Yeah, and so the boys on the right are very comfortable. That looks like really good positioning. Also,
I like this
to go back to the solution for this little guy, if you want him eating at the big kid table with everybody, you know, family dinner, just grab a small chair, put it under his feet, and then you're good to go.
And this is a kid who maybe doesn't need that full back support.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't look like he's kind of slumping, and, you know, he looks like he's
A good
sitting
posture.
up well, good
Yeah.
posture, but yeah, that chair under his feet just kind of really helped set him up well. It's a good solution.
Yeah, no, I like that one too. Okay, and then other things that, there's a lot of DIY you can do. For footrests, you can just, if your ottoman in the house is not super heavy, you can just drag that over to wherever they are. Filling a box with rocks or books, taping it shut and having that be your footrest. Back supports, you can just stick a pillow back there, thick blankets. Side supports, you can cut little pool noodles in and stick those in the chair. Another thing, like this little girl here in the picture with those slippery pajamas, sometimes kids can like slip forward and it can be an issue where they feel a little unstable. So you can put, well, there's a product out there called Dysum. It's like bright blue. It's this real non-skid, sticky material, kind of rubbery feeling. You could get something like that and put it under their seat. Also some like shelf paper that they sell out there just at like Target or Walmart. That is kind of like a non-skid surface. You can just cut off a little square of that and stick it under their bottom, and that can help with the sliding.
All right, so we went over another section there, looking at environmental and home factors. If you want to just take a quick moment, we talked about stressful life events, because you can't always anticipate these, but if there's, you know, if there's things happening, changes happening in your life, some of the, you know, think of the child's eating environment, and are there distractions that we kind of eliminate, make things a little simpler? Are we having an issue with, we don't have grazing on there, but I should have put that on there. If that's kind of what your child's doing, jot some things down there about some ideas about how to improve your meal plan.
Yeah, if there's
We're
anything-
here if you want to chat.
If there's anything that kind of touched a nerve with you, yeah, just put it right here on the second part on your action sheet for environmental and home factors.
And if anyone wants to share one else, everyone
Yeah.
else can always benefit from
Did
that.
anybody have an idea of something that they already know they could improve about their environment
And want to share it.
and want to share it?
Seating part, we
Seating.
just, yeah, we have benches, I mean, he doesn't ever sit on anything but a bench, so.
Okay, yeah, great.
Probably distractions. Harmony has a tendency to want multiple things going on at the same time.
Right, and that's hard, because oftentimes we're gonna do what works for our kids, right? That's why I'm always careful to say,
Never do this.
don't
yeah.
judge parents, because if we're doing something, it's because it's working for them in a way. And I can see with Harmony, right, kind of needing that need for stimulation, right? So are there ways we can kind of get that to her in a way that's still kind of within this routine? Yeah, that's probably a little problem solving, something to kind of.
The only way we can get her to eat when we have to do one and one.
Yeah.
But there has to be something going on in the background, because if there isn't, she
needs that.
starts going like this and she
Yes.
goes everywhere.
And so sometimes like soft music or a child-friendly music or a child-friendly show, sometimes that's what works for some kids too. Yeah, it doesn't have to be
Especially when you're
completely quiet.
working, if you have just a couple of foods, you're gonna kind of be working on building that. You can change some of those habits later, right? I totally get that. I have my middle son also. He needs something going on, right? He needs that stimulation to be focused and eating. Eating on its own is kind of boring for him, right? He
Right,
needs
she
that.
just can't, so it's like,
Yeah.
if we want her to eat at all, there has to be some kind of stimulation going on, whether it's the computer, she's watching YouTube videos with kids in it, or
Yeah.
in the background having kid.
Yeah, and for her right now, that works, right? For another child, that may be too much, but, yeah.
That's okay then.
I think it really depends on your kid, right? And then it's maybe playing with, can you try it without and see what that looks like? I think sometimes, and that, I wouldn't say in your case, sometimes our kids who do need a little more stimulation or a little distraction, or they're seeking that, it can be a habit that can be hard to break later. If we're working with a couple of foods, we're not gonna work on changing that right now, right? So
Pick your
it depends on where your
battles,
kid's at. Pick your battles, yeah.
If you're stressed out, running around, they're in their high chairs, but not everything's quite done yet.
Of course, yeah.
And so you're stressed out, kind of running around because they have no patience. Does it then,
Yeah,
can they feel that stress and then, like, is it better basically to,
yeah.
I mean, I have an 18-month-old and a 3-year-old, so.
So
my
hard
husband-
that age slot.
Yeah, my husband and I usually don't even eat till they go to bed.
Yeah.
But is it better if we're gonna try family dinners to like have it all made and then say, let's come to the table? Because then when they're sitting there and my husband, it doesn't bother my husband, but
Yeah.
they're antsy because it's like, what's going on
Right,
here?
right,
I'm
it's not
freaking out.
necessarily relaxing for you. Yeah, so is that better? Yeah, should we feel bad that that's not happening every day? No, right, be gentle with yourself. So maybe you make a goal of doing that once a week, twice a week, and slowly building. I will, you know, my older boys now, 6 and 8, we do sometimes, you know, aren't able to sit down, and they're able to tell me now, Mom, I really miss having family dinner, and they'll eat less, which is interesting. And there are kids who never stop moving, but for them, there's that routine around that. And you're right, kids do regulate off of us, and when we're stressed, they do get stressed too. That shouldn't make us feel bad, because it also means that if we calm, they can come with us, right? Not just pretending to be calm, but like, okay, what can I do to lower my stress during dinner time? Take small steps though, right? Maybe
Yeah.
once or twice a week, and build up that, see how it goes.
Sometimes, oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sometimes routine has been the problem, right? Because, like, I have an autistic child,
Yeah.
and he wants the same thing every
Right.
day. He doesn't want to deviate from that.
Right.
So it's not just the textures and the things like that. You're changing his routine.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want any change to his routine. He knows exactly what he wants to eat. He has
You're leading
5
us right
things
into our
in his
next section of
diet,
behavior.
you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you're like leading us, you're transitioning us
That's
right
the
into our
same
next, we're about to talk about that. So yeah, behavioral factors for sure, and just by the word behavior, sometimes it has a really negative connotation. Behavior is just a way for a child to communicate,
Communicate what they
Anything,
need, communicate if there's a
anything,
skill
yeah.
they need to build, right? So it's not as much as, oh gosh, they're acting badly, as what are they trying to tell us with the behavior, right? That's kind of how we look at that word.
what
Use that word.
skills do they need to build in order to tell me in a way that is a little easier on me, right?
That too. So the first area we're going to look at under behavioral factors is attention seeking, right? So what this can look like is kids throwing food, spitting out food, refusing to eat food on their own, but they'll let you feed it to them. And that can be seeking attention, and it can also be that need for routine, right? So obviously these all kind of connect and interact. Why do kids do this? I think we know, but sometimes any attention is better than no attention, and it can feel rewarding to them, even though you're frustrated with them, right? And so things to kind of think about with this is usually what works, right, in the perfect world, is kind of giving them less attention for those negative behaviors, and at the same time, giving them that positive, specific praise for what they're doing well, right? So maybe they're throwing peas on the floor. Let's pretend for a moment they're not dumping the whole plate. They're just throwing some peas on the floor, right? And we're kind of sitting with them, and as soon as they do something else, oh, thank you so much for sitting there and trying a couple blueberries. Look at you taking that sip of milk, right? Obviously depends on where your kid's at. They might be at a different level than that, but it's just shifting that attention to the positive, right?
About 10 minutes behind.
Okay, perfect. So next, looking at independence, asserting independence, huge factor for this age. We touched on that briefly before. We know what this looks like because we see this every day, right? I love some of the examples that Lauren put on here. Instead of kind of, so we want to offer choices in a way that makes sense and still works with our goals, right? So maybe instead of, don't you want to eat your lunch? Because it's always easier to say no to that. It's, which plate do you want for your lunch? Instead of, do you want strawberries? Always easier to say no. Do you want 1 or 2 strawberries on your plate?
So you're just taking the no or yes, no out.
You're taking the yes, no out because it's always easier to say no.
Because in a way,
especially
if you
with
ask
this
your
age.
child this yes or no question, they say no, you kind of should be honoring that, right, in a way.
Well, you do.
You've
It's
given
kind of
them
like
the
sales,
choice.
you know, you're sales, they do that. They don't want to ask, when you want to sell something to somebody, you don't want them to say yes or no.
Exactly.
You
So
want them to
gotta sell the
choose.
strawberries.
We know you're going to buy
They
this.
agree.
Right,
Yeah.
you only ask questions that aren't going to give a no answer.
But, you know, the child being given any kind of choice will make them think, okay, well, I'm
Feels a
getting,
little better.
I've got a
No,
little power in
no,
this situation.
always no.
Always. Maybe something to practice then.
Okay.
Third area we want to look at with behavior is that rigidity. We call it rigidity, it's also that need for control, right? And if we look at it as a skill, we're looking at the skill of flexibility, right, and building that, right? And often this goes really hand in hand with asserting independence. So what that can look like, we all know, I'm sure, but we only want our food cut up a certain way. We only want a certain brand of food. I only want strawberry flavored yogurt of a certain brand. Or have to eat off my certain plate. And we see this in all kids. We see it oftentimes more with kids with some anxiety. That's my two older boys, OCD, autism. But we can see it with a number of kids. So it's not to say, oh my gosh, my child does that must be an X, right? We see it with a variety of kiddos. And it's really this need to feel safe and in control of things, right? And so kind of the general rule of thumb with kids really showing this need for control, this rigidity, is picking your battles and making really small changes. And you're going to pick your days. If it's a hard day for them, you're not going to budge them, right? But if it's a day or a time of day where you feel like they're going to be a little more open to change, it's saying, hey, here's your favorite food on your dinosaur plate, which you love. Instead of cutting it this way, we're going to cut it at a vertical. We're going to cut it slightly different. Or we're going to cut it with a cookie cutter, your favorite animal, right? It's just making small changes to what the food looks like, and then slowly making other changes.
And if you can get your child involved in that change, like, ooh, help me push the cookie cutter down, if any of that works with your child, that the more involved they are, the better.
And working on that love for routine, it's maybe picking a certain time of day, right? Usually not family dinner when the kind of stress is high, but another time, snack time on the weekends. And you're just building that routine of every Saturday morning or this point of the day, we're playing a little bit with food, right? We're going to play just a little bit. All right, so kind of the last area we wanted to look at with behavior is trouble staying at the table. Obviously, the behavior, that's what the kid's doing. It can happen for a variety of reasons. So we want to make sure we're looking at positioning. We want to make sure, are we meeting their need for movement? We've talked a little bit about that. Some kids really need, these are my 3 boys, that heavy work or that active play before eating, right? It's going to help them feel a little more calm and grounded. Their nervous system needs that running around and, that heavy work. So let's say we've done all that and it's still really hard. Your kid still really has that habit of moving. We've talked about some of those ways they can get a little bit of movement while they're seated. But maybe we're also kind of rewarding them sitting at the table, right? And so you can do a chart, figure out what works for your child in terms of reward. That makes sense. Probably not something sugary if you're trying to then finish the meal. But.
So yesterday, he wanted to look at some kids' videos.
Yeah.
And she said, we haven't eaten your dinner.
Right.
So she said, you can't watch that until you finish your dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And he finished it. I mean, is that, and then I felt kind of like that was, I mean, you're saying that, but I just, in my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know if that's a good idea.
Something didn't feel right about that? What didn't feel right about that?
Like, is he always going to want the videos in order to eat? Like, that's going to become the norm.
Sure. Well, it totally depends on your kiddo, but for many kiddos, we're using kind of these rewards outside of food to get them into this habit of eating and trying other foods with the hope that at some point soon, just eating is going to be satisfying in and of itself.
Okay.
Eating becomes its own reward because you're
For
taking
most
care of the
kiddos.
hunger problem.
Yeah, I mean, he did. He ate all the rice and the stuff we cut up, and he ate it all, you know.
Yeah, so sometimes having that really clear reward or something, it has to be something that makes sense for your family, right? A little screen time after eating. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you done? You're just going to leave now?
I'm good now.
I got my intervention.
Got it.
Not all that, but.
So we're going to take a moment to get out our action sheet again, and in that third area down here, if anything popped out to you guys in terms of your child's behavior, what is my child telling me with his or her behavior? Go ahead and jot that down.
And this, might be some follow-up with your team too, but at least kind of a starting point of, hey, here's what they're doing, I think we really want my attention, or really need control, what can we problem solve around this?
Okay, so next we're going to talk about sensory factors. We've talked about environment, behavior. Now sensory factors, I put this picture of this pregnant mother cooking something and just having a really hard time tolerating the smell of whatever she's cooking. She's cooking for her family, she's having a really hard time. So just for any of you who were pregnant at any time, just remembering what it was like to feel that way and having that empathy. Some of our kids are really grossed out by certain smells, certain textures, the look of certain foods, and just to kind of have that empathy for them that they think it's very gross. Okay, so when we're talking about sensory factors, you need to be a detective, okay? So what you're going to need to do is first, you want to establish what are my child's sensory preferences. That's going to involve listing every single food your child regularly accepts, and looking for kind of patterns. You know, are these all similar color? Are these all kind of a similar texture? Like, oh, my child isn't tolerating, you know, creamy foods. He's only choosing crunchy foods. You're looking for maybe patterns in flavor. I worked with a student who just loved spicy, like big, bold flavors. He kind of had that like sensory, like that low registration. He needed things to hit him over the head for him to feel it. And so, you know, that's where we started with, okay, other spicy foods. Certain temperatures they might prefer, and certain smells they might prefer, or maybe they choose foods that don't have as much of a smell. So sensory preferences. And after we're done here, we do have this purple sheet. And in case you're having a hard time remembering, like sometimes we'll ask parents, well, what do they eat? And then we'll kind of get this list, and then later another email, oh yeah, and also this, you know. So it's hard to think about what are all the, so this has a big long list of a lot of different foods, almost like a little checklist.
Cool.
So you can grab this, and what's nice about this purple sheet, so it's going to help you be that sensory detective. And then also if you're having a really hard time, it's just good to kind of have that data on your child, so you can kind of have that, like let's say you're working with a child who's a problem feeder, they have 2 foods, and you know, it's not the worst thing to talk to your pediatrician about, like feeding therapy or something like that. Then you have this data for them, and you can kind of help them just get that information easily and quickly. This also has best time of day for them to eat. There's all kinds of...
I think of those, when you go in to see your pediatrician, you might have another child with you, you have, 10 to 15 minutes, and I don't know about you all, but I can feel a little bit scattered or a little bit, stressed. And so I think the more you can bring in that information and say, yeah, he's holding his growth curve, but we're eating 3 or 4 foods. And this is what has to happen for our child to eat. And he's lost foods that he used to love and hasn't eaten for months. Right? Just really being able to bring that information can sometimes change that conversation, and you can, talk about a possible referral to see if you can therapist.
Okay.
So data is powerful.
And then the other thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the foods, every single food that your child has kind of strongly rejected. So you're, looking at facial grimaces, maybe gagging, maybe pushing it away. You kind of know when you put something in front of your child and they're really rejecting it, like what kind of grosses them out. So making a list of those and looking for patterns, and those would be your child's sensory sensitivities.
You guys have a good sense, kind of looking over that, what your child prefers or really doesn't like in terms of some of those sensory pieces? Yeah, I think so.
And it's a little hard to jump to that sometimes without but making that list is really helpful. Like you might kind of make assumptions, but then it's like, oh, actually they do eat like sticky, weird, creamy textures because they eat this yogurt, and maybe it's something different that is the problem, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but just normal development in terms of babies eating. They usually go from creamy to sticky to crumbs to foods you have to chew. So just kind of the idea of this slide being that if you have a child with a sensory sensitivity, they might have skipped one of these steps. They may not even have had the chance to really build some of the skills of manipulating that food in their mouth because they were so grossed out by it, and so they might have skipped one of these steps. Okay. So, just a few words on once you're that sensory detective, and you do find some preferences and some patterns, what they might mean. And this is not the case for every single child, but just some patterns that we see. So sometimes kids who are only eating creamy foods, sometimes those are the kids who kind of have that hypersensitivity to sharp edges. If you think about crunching a Dorito in your mouth, all those little sharp pieces scatter in your mouth, and that can be a little bit much for some kids with hypersensitivity. They might have a heightened gag reflex, so if you have, they're only choosing those creamy foods because there's no crumbs falling to the back of their throat. They might have anxiety about swallowing. That could be maybe they've choked in the past and they don't want to eat anything with chunks because they're worried about that. Avoidance of chewy or crunchy food may indicate muscle fatigue or poor chewing skills. So remember, like giving a child a piece of beef jerky, that if they can't chew, they are not going to be successful with that. Kids who only want dry or crunchy food, sometimes they like that dry and crunchy foods can provide a lot of sensory input.
A lot of jaw work, right?
A lot
Which
of
is kind
jaw
the heavy
work.
work, but for the mouth.
Yeah, so sometimes those kids need that sensory input. And sometimes they're choosing those dry foods because they can't handle like the weight of creamy foods. Like if you were to eat a bite of oatmeal, that's a little heavier than eating like a Cheeto. And so that could sit on the back of your tongue. And if you have a heightened gag reflex, you're not going to want to eat foods like that are going to do that to you. Children who are choosing only certain brands or color, that oftentimes is a rigidity issue. It's like, this is my comfortable thing that I like, and those chicken nuggets have to be in the shape of a dinosaur, otherwise they're not food. And then a child who's tolerating variety but not a lot of volume, you want to look into maybe their GI issues or constipation, or a slowdown in growth even. Okay.
So just a quick note about gagging. We talked a little bit about, some of the hypersensitive, some of the different reasons that kids can gag. We wanted to just go into that really briefly, being thoughtful of our time. We're a little bit behind. So gagging is different than choking, right? Their airways aren't blocked, but that kind of reflex that's children and adults have to protect their airways is engaged, and it's, the child's gagging. And that can happen for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes kids have they're really sensitive to smell or taste or texture. That can happen. You want to just make sure to respect that is making your child gag. Doesn't mean you've never shown that food again. But you also, it's a valid, you want to honor that is how your child's responding. And you want to just work really slowly as you're figuring out why they're gagging.
And we have some ideas for addressing gagging. We're going to go over this really briefly because we do want to kind of catch up, but I do have all of this written on this larger handout if anybody wants it. And the reason why I think this is kind of good information is, even though this is about gagging, it could be about just that feeling of being grossed out by something. You know what I mean? Like, you can interchange those ideas. So, for example, gagging due to texture. Even if your child's not gagging, but they're really disliking the texture, you can still use some of these ways to address it. So, working on tolerating an undesirable texture with your hands first, because why would you put something in your mouth that you can't tolerate touching with your hands, as an example. Some kids, like, they won't touch anything too gooey, but if you put it inside a plastic bag and then have them knead it through the plastic bag and then, let's open it up and see what we did, it just makes things a little less scary, so kind of breaking it down for them.
Breaking into steps is definitely a thing.
Breaking it into steps, yeah. Okay, so more on gagging, but again, grab this yellow sheet on your way out. And we will get, more into that. So the big picture that our two goals are to think about the sensory preferences, and we want to, these are the foods your child is eating. We want to expand those foods. And so looking at what are other foods that are kind of similar to this that we can kind of build and basically change a little tiny bit, a little tiny bit, a little tiny bit until we have a larger repertoire of foods. And then goal number 2 is looking at those sensory sensitivities and how do we build tolerance to those things. There might be foods that your child will never eat, and that's okay. I mean, a lot of adults have foods that they just never liked and never will like. But if you have these large groups of food or whole textures that they're not tolerating, working on tolerating is an important thing. Desensitization is an important goal to have. So we're going to talk about 2 ways to do this. The first way is food chaining, and then the second way is going to be the steps to eating. So food chaining, what that is, so it's developed by a speech therapist, is you're starting with a preferred food, so something that your child always accepts. You make small changes to it over time, kind of in different steps, and then you end up with a wider repertoire. So an example would be Cheetos is the accepted food. So your first step would be to maintain and expand.
We want to get something relevant.
Yeah, right. Like a lot of kids really like Cheetos. You want to maintain the current taste and texture. So you're just going to change a little small thing about it. So maybe instead of Cheetos, cheese puffs. Like they're still cheesy, they're still crunchy. Or different brands of Cheetos. And then level 2 would be you're going to change the taste, but you're going to maintain the texture. So some other things that kind of feel like Cheetos in the mouth, but they taste a little different. So like maybe white cheddar puffs or veggie straws or tortilla chips. dipping something in dressing, like ranch dressing or barbecue sauce, can be a really valuable tool for kids who accept it. Like, if you can get your child to like a sauce, you can really food chain a lot faster, because then that sauce is safe, and like, well, what else can we put in the sauce?
It's
can
a
be
really
really
wonderful bridge, right?
powerful,
I
yes.
can eat this in this dip, maybe I could try a new food that's similar in the same dip.
Mhm.
It's kind of like a sign that the food is safe. like
Yeah.
you said.
And the flavor can be very masking.
Mhm.
Level 3 would be you're gonna keep the taste, but you're gonna vary the texture. So we've got Cheetos we're talking about, so we're gonna maybe mac and cheese, it's still cheesy, nacho cheese, grilled cheese, cheese on crackers, beans with cheese. And then the last step, you're gonna vary the taste and texture. So macaroni and cheese with other sauces, ham and cheese sandwich. If they're tolerating the grilled cheese, then try maybe a ham and cheese, or veggies and cheese. White cheddar popcorn, bean and cheese burritos, ranch dressing with carrots. So we're gonna do a little activity with you guys. So your green sheet, the food chaining sheet, on the top row here, we put another example, which would be chocolate chips. A lot of kids will accept that just fine. But we were thinking about food chaining with you guys kind of as a group, so we can sort of get our like clinical reasoning down and see if you guys kind of can do this too. We were thinking a good one to potentially chain would be chicken McNuggets, because those seem to be really popular. Is that okay with you guys if we chain that? I know, I'm with you.
I feel like it's
too.
always easier to do this part of a group, and then when you go home, you're like, okay, I've done this once.
So if everyone wants to write McDonald's chicken nuggets, specifically McDonald's, like we're not tolerating anything else at this point. Maybe we'll do the levels
Yeah, that
together.
sounds perfect.
Okay. So level 1, how would you guys go about maintaining and expanding the current taste and texture? So we're keeping it pretty similar to McDonald's chicken McNuggets. Does anybody have an idea of like how they would do
Small
that?
change.
Small
Breast of
change.
chicken,
What's that?
just like a breast, like without the breading.
That's gonna be a couple more steps.
Oh.
That might be a little too much.
For a child who really, they know the taste of chicken nuggets from McDonald's, and those are their chicken nuggets, what is one small step you would take?
Go Wendy's.
A different
Yes.
type of chicken nugget.
Different type of chicken nugget,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Another McNugget.
And some kids are gonna be more willing to take those jumps, bigger jumps, and some kids are gonna need a little smaller jump. So that would be a smaller jump, would be,
So yeah, different
different
brand.
Maybe the
brand.
spice of the chicken nugget, like the flavoring.
We might even work on that in the next level.
Yeah.
Depending where your kid's at, right? If your
Little tiny
kid,
change at first.
yeah, your kid might be okay with larger jumps, just depends on your kid on that.
What about maybe cutting the McDonald's chicken McNuggets into 4 pieces, and they've never eaten it like that before? That's a change. That's an acceptable change for that very first level of food chaining.
And you would wanna do that with them, right? Not have that be a surprise, but kind of talk about, oh, I'm gonna cut my chicken nuggets up, we can cut your chicken nuggets up, give them a little time for processing that. And then, yeah, so they're seeing it whole, and then you're cutting it up with them. Yeah.
Okay, so then the next level, level 2, so we're gonna vary the taste, we're gonna change up the taste, but maintaining kind of that chicken nugget texture. Does anybody have any ideas?
Other small fried thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Same thing, just with dipping sauces.
Yes, yeah, see if you can do a dipping
Nice.
sauce, that would be great. This might be a time to try, like you were saying, a chicken breast, but maybe a chicken breast with breading on it, but maybe one that you're cooking at home, like
Or like
chicken
Yeah,
chitlins,
you're doing it at home.
strips.
Yeah, even doing chicken nuggets at home would be.
Home,
Yeah,
yeah.
Even like things like breaded zucchini, right? Because you're changing up the taste, but you're keeping that texture of something breaded. That could work too. Fish sticks, things like that. And
If
again,
smell is an issue, if smell is, yeah, if they have a hard time with strong smells.
sure,
then-
yeah. And again, this is going to be, you're going to be presenting this new food with a few other things that they like
That's key.
on a plate that's not too overwhelming, small amount of it. If they don't accept it, then we're going to think, okay, what's the way we can interact with this food? You want to pick it up and put it in the all done bowl? That's great. You're touching it. Great. Or, you want to stab it with a fork and put it in an all done bowl. You're still interacting with it. That's okay. And it might take several repetitions.
Absolutely. Just really briefly, I think of my own experience. I have some friends who are Japanese, and my husband's from Chile, and I'm often in a social situation where there's foods that I've never tried before and are a little bit challenging, right, for me. And I think about, you know, I wouldn't want a huge portion of that challenging food, whether it's like smoked eel or, you know, whatever kind of new and exotic food it is for me. I'd want a really small portion and then a lot of other foods I'm comfortable with, right? And I think probably all of us would in that situation. So putting ourselves in our kids' shoes, you don't want it to be, boom, here's your challenge portion of smoked eel, right? Keeping that in mind.
Exactly. And then level 4, so we're varying, so we have a child who's maybe accepted chicken nuggets and barbecue sauce. They've accepted maybe some breaded chicken patties, like maybe on bread with some ketchup. You turn it into a sandwich now. Can you guys think of other ways to, did I skip something?
No.
Okay.
No.
Can you guys think of just other things from there?
Another way you could vary it.
Yeah. Just like maybe chicken burritos, taquitos, maybe sandwiches with lunch meat in them. So you've gone from a child who's eaten only chicken nuggets to maybe someone who's eating like sandwiches now, or maybe fish sticks or zucchini if we're lucky, or burritos. So it can be pretty powerful, the food chaining, but
And
it takes a lot of time.
So, you know, we've done this really briefly as an activity. That can take, you know, it's not going to be this kind of linear thing, right? It can be, we're going to try this new food and then we're going to go back and give that food a break, and then maybe in like 10 days, give it another little try. It's just really small steps over time.
And talk to your team too. If you want help with this food chaining, you know, your team will be happy to help or to refer you to someone who can help break it down for you, because it's kind of hard to do it the first couple times, depending on the food that you want to change. You know. Okay, so so we talked about food chaining, and then the other thing we're going to talk about today is sorry, this is your slide.
You're fine.
Substituting.
So Lauren talked about how, you know, with the food chaining, we're kind of going from a preferred food and slowly chaining it. Actually, back to that really quickly. Pull out your pink sheet and put a food down that you want to kind of play around with food chaining a little bit. So a tip would be, don't take your child's favorite food. You don't want to probably mess with that, right? Especially if there's like a protein or a key food that you're counting on, if your child is only eating a couple of foods. But think of maybe more of a food that, a food that, you know, your child will eat, but it's not like the core food that you're counting on, if that makes sense. Because sometimes kids have a reaction against having that food changed or messed with.
They drop it.
They
Sometimes they'll
drop
drop it and they won't go back to it.
Yeah, so kind of,
Why do they drop things? Like, so for a while we could do red sauce, and I was like, no, you ruined it. Why'd you put that on there? You know?
yeah.
It's hard to know that for sure. I suspect some of it could just be like, if you're eating the same thing every day, you're going to get sick of it. Even if you really like it, it's eventually you're just going to get sick of it.
Which is why when your child is under, you know, those 20, 30 foods, you want to really be thinking about getting some support and help, and building more food so that if they drop one, it's not as much of an issue. Yeah. All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next section, unless anyone has any quick questions. Be thoughtful of your time, make sure we get to the next part. I know this is a lot of information, so again, we're hoping it's just kind of a starting place, and you can, you know, connect with your team and get help, and also think about, you know, do I need some more intensive support, and should I be checking in with a pediatrician, right? 'Cause
I
this
do
is a
have one
huge
question.
subject. Yeah.
You know, with certain, obviously with certain sensory development disorders or food disorders, food chaining doesn't always work. They just drop it and then they don't touch it, they don't look at it again.
Yeah.
So when that happens, I mean, she's already working with the food clinic, the feeding clinic, and they're stumped. They don't know. But when you're dealing with something like that, how do you initiate something new when they're just dropping foods? If there's, you know, I mean, and sometimes I think it's burnout, but sometimes it's just because it was different.
Right.
So, yeah.
So if you're in that place where your child's already dropping foods, how do you kind of respectfully introduce some new foods?
You gotta be careful, right?
You gotta be careful. Yeah, what has been the advice of your private therapist?
They have no idea. They've done food therapy, they've done food play, She's not afraid of food at all.
Right,
She's
to
not afraid to
interact
touch
with
it.
it.
She's not afraid to touch it on her face. She's just
All of that.
won't. And she won't try to taste anything new. She'll put it up like this and smell it
Mm-hmm.
and act like she's gonna do it, but she won't even come close.
She'll get it right.
And she's like, you do it.
What is the preferred food? I mean, what do they obviously they're eating something. What is the one food that they gravitate toward?
For a while there, she was eating oranges, then she stopped eating oranges. She was eating chicken nuggets, had to be McDonald's, then she didn't want them. Then she went to pretzels, didn't want those.
So
now
she
it's
eats for a
fries.
while and stops.
But those are still vastly different foods.
Yeah,
They are very different.
and then she
foods.
just don't,
It's a
we're
good
talking
point.
months and months and months will go by, and she won't eat anything other than like
And within
chips.
pretzels, it's like
Or-
preferred pretzels, same brand. Yeah.
Yeah. And right now she's on two different food groups that are just, so, yeah, so that's the question, is when you start getting like up to
Yeah.
5 and then you're dropping.
I think there is a point, and I hate to say this at a training like this, but sometimes there's a point where like, and you want to talk to your pediatrician, yeah, like, are there vitamin deficiencies, are there growing problems, and if there are, I mean, at the end of the day, a child's never gonna starve, they can always get a G-tube, they, and still work on oral feeding, it's just a
Or
little
get
trickier.
supplements another way.
Or get supplements
Like
other
insurance
ways.
or something, yeah.
Which
We
you
did
wanna
insure
work
for a
with,
while.
pediatrician or a nutritionist on that. So at the end of the day, there's always, your child will develop and grow, their brain will grow.
That's the big goal.
That's a
And you
good
can always
point.
still
That's
work
a good
on
point.
oral feeding.
Just to get them checked out, to make sure that if they are picky, they're not missing something.
I think it's a really good point.
That's a really good
because
point.
We
That's a
often
really
work
good
with
point.
families where we say, is your pediatrician concerned? And they say, we've talked to them and they're not concerned. And we see those same kids and think they're eating 2, 3, 6 foods and they're all, kind of crackers or beige or carbohydrates, and we would be concerned kind of nutritionally and in terms of them building a bigger repertoire of food.
That's a
So I
good
think
point.
it is kind of going into those, sessions.
Ultimately, that's the most important thing, is that they're nutritionally okay.
Sure,
Right.
yeah, sure. We
I
have
mean-
their
Their brain
skills,
has
so
to
we
grow.
have time.
Right,
but
right, the
we need to
brain needs that
prioritize,
stuff,
yeah.
yeah.
If you can, I know Harmony's very picky, but if you can somehow get an interest in smoothies, that is a really good way if kids can start eating smoothies, because you can change the flavors of those really easy depending on what you put in. So the child, thinks smoothies are good, they're safe, but I'm kind of burning out on this flavor, let's try a different flavor, and you can always put vitamins in smoothies, you can put protein powder, you can
Okay.
do all sorts
I'll
of
certainly
stuff.
try it.
And sometimes kids helping make it can help too. They are,
Sounds like she
blenders are
does
loud,
that.
but that's okay. They can learn to plug their ears and wear headphones. But yeah.
Thank you.
Let's keep brainstorming that. Keep talking, yeah. Okay, so the other idea, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but kind of the steps to eating. And there's a whole program of just intensive eating support that it's called the SOS approach, which I forget what that stands for. Sensory, oral, something, SOS, which I'll be help, of course. Kind of, that a lot of intensive eating clinics do. So know that that's out there, but also know, when we've gone to these continuing ed opportunities, learn about this program, we've been able to take away some kind of big take-home messages that were helpful. One, eating is so much more than 2 steps. I think we think of it as like food on the plate, and it's in our mouth, and it's 2 steps. And actually, for all children, neurotypical children, they need sometimes at least 17 exposures to a new food before they're willing to put it in their mouth. I think for many kids, those steps are more subtle. We don't notice them as much. Their reactions are maybe not as strong. But they are actually checking food out and wondering about it before they're deciding whether it's safe to put in their mouths. If we kind of stop and think about it, this process can be slow.
Yeah, and this K2Me, if you go to www.spdstar.org, there's a lot more information about her and her program. It's a really good program. We're just skimming the surface. This is not a training on her program. Just to let you know that this idea is out there of, there are a lot of steps to eating that are not just putting the food in your mouth and swallowing
And I
it.
think where I've seen families kind of use this as a guide, depending on kind of where their kid is at home, is kind of saying, okay, my kid's not eating this food, but they are actually able to have her at the family table. They're tolerating it, right? Step 1, oh, okay, so they don't eat strawberries, but they're actually interacting with it and smelling it. Okay, so they're like 3 steps in on that, right?
Yeah,
Some
where's my
families-
child stuck, and where's the next step?
Yeah, how can I kind of get them to that next step? So sometimes for some kids, for families, it can be kind of a helpful guide. Up on the fridge, and then kind of some of those target foods, and here's where we're at. How can we kind of get to that next step? And respecting that it's going to be from tolerating to interacting, not from tolerating to eating. Right. So that's kind of the idea on that. And then just briefly,
We're good on time.
okay, great, thank you. The step I want to talk about here is interacting, and this is where I've seen just working with families, doing some classes, going in and doing food play in some of the classrooms here, but also doing home visits. This is where I've seen kind of the most kind of growth and forward movement is kids interacting with food. And what I love is if they can do something that's really defined, so they know the pressure's not on them to eat, but they have a task, right? So that can be helping serve family members, right? There's not this sense that they need to eat it, but they're helping, they're interacting with the food. They're hopefully a little more calm because the pressure's not on to eat, and they're getting that smell, and they're getting information about the food when they're more able to kind of process that information, right? Does that make sense? I've seen kids love helping with, stirring, or mom cuts up the vegetables and I watch, and then I get to pour it into a bowl before she, puts it into the pot to steam, of course. Here in the center, we've had a lot of fun kind of cutting oranges in half and squeezing to make orange juice with the manual juice squeezer, right? So you kind of, you're interacting with it, but again, there's not that pressure to eat it. And we've had kids who never drank orange juice, believe it or not, never tolerated that, who within, 30 minutes of making orange juice and watching their friends make orange juice, maybe watching a little video about oranges and how they're picked, right? Having that story, that context, who will then try orange juice, right? We've done the apple peelers and peeling apples. Again, there's no pressure on me to eat right now. I'm doing something, I'm interacting with the apple. It's very defined, and I don't feel the pressure to eat. And so I'm a little more in that rest and digest, and I'm curious versus fight or flight, which would make all the difference. And then again, I've seen kids with apple peelers, right? Which their parents would just never believe that, because their friends are doing it at the age, it's fun. We brought strawberries in, and this is one where I thought, oh my gosh, there's not kind of an obvious how to interact with it without touching it. And that was my uh-oh moment, right, in the class. And then one of the kids picked up a straw and started poking at the strawberry. And at first I was like, what are you doing, right? It was perfect, because they would poke at the straw, and then they would kind of, they sometimes push the air out and push the, shot the piece of strawberry out onto their plate. But at other times, they were getting close to it, and they were willing to kind of then suck a piece of strawberry out of the straw, right? So kids who were at first not wanting to touch it at all and wanted to say no, because all they knew was yes or no, were then willing to interact with it a little bit, calmed a little bit, were trying a little of the strawberry, which they hadn't done before.
I'm going to add to that with the straw. So there's a point where in the year where a lot of our kids here at the center read The Very Hungry Caterpillar over and over and over again. It's a great book, and then The Very Hungry Caterpillar, the caterpillar eats holes through a bunch of different fruits.
That's perfect.
Which are great target foods because they're sweet, they're got a lot of phytonutrients. So what we did, cutting those fruits from the book into thin slices and having them poke holes like a caterpillar was a really great activity, and a lot of them did, taste it or touch it to their tongue, and then very neutral. Is that yummy or yucky? And if they say yucky, oh, okay, all right, no problem. So just kind of not giving them too much, judgment wise.
So we have the mad scientist at the dinner table who's like trying to mix their liquids together with the food.
Yeah.
And really, really playing with things, and if something's got a crunch, he wants to smash it and kind of see what that might do.
Yeah, right.
So is this a behavioral issue? Is this a sensory thing? Do we have to figure that out, and then do we discourage that as much as possible? Or?
I wonder about, is there a time of the day other than maybe when you sit down as a family that you could really encourage them to do some of that food play, right? And I've seen families kind of cue that with their kids with, okay, we're going to put our apron on. If they don't like the feel of apron, don't put the apron on. But whatever it is to kind of cue, we're going to do some food play. You're going to be a food scientist. That's a term we use a lot. I can see that maybe working, right?
Yeah.
And they get it kind of set up. My 6-year-old will mix the most bizarre foods together. Not at dinner time necessarily, right? He used to try to do it at dinner time, still sometimes does. But he has that food play time where he can mix sugar and lemon juice and just everything together. And he knows when that time is, right? He'll kind of come out now and say, hey, Mom, can I do some food experiments? So maybe there's a time where we can set that up for him, and then we kind of, at dinner, are a little more, hey, see if we can kind of shape that more to be sitting down with the family.
Okay.
Yeah, we keep brainstorming that. All right, so the quick note I wanted to make on the next page, and we're just still walking through these steps, right, but with a little more detail, is the step from touching to bringing to the lips is a big step, right? So some fun ways are often, you know all about this, but kissing that food goodbye, and that's oftentimes when kids will take that first bite, because they know, again, there's not a pressure to eat. They know they're just kissing the food goodbye, so that's, the kid might kiss it, put it in the garbage can or a bowl or whatever it is. And then that step from kissing it or whatever it is on the lips to actually put it in their mouth is another huge step. And some of the ways that can be successful is having an all done bowl, and them knowing they can always put food in an all done bowl. You want them to know that once they put it in their mouth, they don't have to swallow it, right? And I know that kind of goes against like table etiquette, but if they can put it in their mouth and you can kind of show them, oh, we can spit it in our napkin, or if your kid's at a different level, you can spit it in your bowl, whatever that is that feels safe and easy for your child, they're more willing to put it in their mouth, right? So we want to make it easy for them to take the food back out. We often talk about, let's see what your teeth have to say about this, right? Let's crunch it. Can you crunch it, right? Like, what are the ways you can do things with food in your mouth that's not talking about eating? I can crunch my, wow, listen to those pretzels. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Can you make a big crunch? So we're really being creative with what we can talk about and interact with the food in our mouths without it being swallow it, swallow it, swallow it.
You can even find YouTube videos of, you know, bunnies eating carrots, just, you know, animals crunching on things. And
absolutely. Keeping that really fun. Because the more kids are having fun and engaging and curious, the more they're likely to eat versus being in that fight or flight state. All right, so really briefly.
And swallowing is last.
Swallowing is last.
Take a really long time to get there.
Exactly. I wanted to pull in just some advice from a family that I worked with last year. I learned so much from working with this family. This was a little boy likely on the autism spectrum, not yet identified, and a mom who really wanted to work towards independence in kindergarten. So she had kind of this vision. And we did some consult every month. We would check in by phone how things are going. And so it was a lot of detective work. He was much more likely to try food at preschool with his friends. And so we really kind of used that, right? Let's introduce the new foods at preschool and then bring them back home. And so here's some of the things she figured out. Temperature really mattered to her son, right? He really needed things warm. And so when we ended up sending the chicken nuggets and he was ready to eat those, we sent him in a thermos that he could open. It was a lot of problem solving. He didn't like taking bites out of food, but if it was a small piece, he would try it. So his preschool teacher actually figured that out. If she could cut up even the baby carrots or whatever that might be, he didn't want that feeling of biting into it, but he'd be willing to try a little piece, and then he would totally eat it if it was broken up into bits, right? So small changes that totally led him to eat more food, right? Mixed textures were difficult and continue to be difficult. One of the foods he will eat is pizza, and another thing with this child is that when people come visit them and they go out to eat, and those other people that he really cares about, like grandma, try new food, he's much more willing to try new food, right? So he's got some sensory things, and he's got some need for routine, but he's also really willing to try things if people that he trusts try them, right? So that was, yes. All right, so we get to the next slide. Okay. So activities that helped her son interact more with food. You've talked about this as well, but having him be the helper in the grocery store. Let's pick out a different colored apple this week. Let's pick out the apples we always pick out. The Granny's, probably wasn't Granny Smith's, probably a little too tart. Whatever that is, but then let's try a different apple, right? So doing all of that, kind of exploring the grocery store, because again, he knows the pressure isn't on him to eat in the grocery store. And then doing a lot of food prep together in the kitchen. You know, he loved to watch Mom rip up the kale and get all of that ready, cut up the apple in different ways and really explore it. And then they also did do a lot of videos around kind of where food's grown and just fun kid videos with songs, and that really helped him be curious about food. He was really liked kind of logic, and so he wanted to grow bigger, and so Mom really talked about these are the things we need to do to grow bigger, and they read a book about nutrition and how your bones need, you know, calcium, and your eyes need carrots. And I would go visit him in the preschool and he would say, I've been eating my carrots because they have vitamin E and they will help me see better. It was perfect, right? That's what he needed for it to make sense. And then just some general tips, and this is from her straight to you guys. It takes time. Sorry for that, but also want to be realistic, right, so you don't get frustrated. And she talks about boy food problem solving, working with your child. It's actually going to be, this great way to connect with your child too, which I love how she said that. Build a team. This isn't you doing this on your own, right? This is getting kind of problem solving with a preschool teacher, your ECSE team, us, right? If we're at a place where we're eating just a couple of foods, it's really having that conversation with the nutrition, right? Even if it's more than 3 or 5 foods. If you have concerns, really bringing up that conversation and bringing in those sheets that say, hey, here's how many foods we're eating, here are the issues we're having at mealtime. And I love this, learn from your child, and this is what I am going to read. We found a pattern with my son. In general, he doesn't like mixed textures like strawberries with whipped cream. He still won't eat cake, but he just started eating the frosting only. So with the strawberry, I thought he might eat them if we can put some whipped cream on them, because they're like frosting, right? So she's always doing this detective work that we all do as parents. I asked my son if he wanted to try the strawberries with whipped cream, and he said yes. But when I gave the strawberries with the whipped cream on top, he panicked and wouldn't eat any of it. I asked him how he wanted it, and he said, on the side. He wanted both, but he didn't want them together. Once I separated the whipped cream and the strawberries, he ate the whipped cream first, and then he ate the strawberries. And so her point, I just love this, your child may not eat the way you do, and that's okay. Just talk with them, ask them questions. You know, if your child isn't giving you that verbally, you know, kind of read their behavior, read what they're doing, kind of try to figure out, you know, put your detective hat on, as we talked about. Just talk with them and just keep engaging with them, because we always learn a lot from the kids.
Okay, and so just very briefly, take-home messages. Eating is very complicated, takes a long time. There may be some foods your child never eats, and that's okay. Very important to rule out medical problems, aspiration, before moving on with working on expanding their diet. Considering environment, behavior, and sensory factors, and just keeping it fun, keeping your stress level low, playing with your food, involve your kids in meal prep. Since it is a slow process, don't, you know, if there's a day when just things aren't going well, just let it go. It's not going to be worth it to,
Let alone lose hope. And yeah, for example, around the holidays with just change of routine and stresses and family visiting, whatever that is, you're just going to keep it a little simple. You're not going to add the challenge then, right? Knowing this is a long game.
Okay, and we finished on time. We've got 4 minutes left for
We worked
questions
really
and
hard
answers. This
to
took a
do
lot of
that.
practice for us to get to this point. This is a long PowerPoint. Do you guys have any questions? Does anybody have any kind of one thing that they know they're going to do right away, like that they've kind of learned during this presentation, or just like a simple change they can make at home that they can implement pretty quickly?
The positioning
Positioning.
and phrasing.
Okay.
Slowly building, reducing that time, right?
Yeah.
I tend to, I'm a very play-heavy tactic eater. I tend to just only play games with them, but maybe we need to cut down on some of the distractions a little bit more rather than
What
keeping
kind of
that.
games?
Well, you know, we're recording here, so, but, you know, like the food talks, and obviously their greatest fear on the planet is teeth, so. Of course, if they see teeth, they're very concerned, and then if one gets eaten, their friend is obviously worried what happened to their
Great.
friend.
I wouldn't cut that out. Yeah, that sounds like
No,
fun.
especially if humor works, and knowing your son a little bit, I think it would, and I would keep with that. And I mean, we've worked with, definitely, I can think of a number of kids, even just last year, where humor and stories was their way to connect and make this safe. And especially with someone they trust, so I wouldn't necessarily change that.
Okay.
I love that.
And
There is one thing I would suggest, especially if you're trying to get your kids to eat something new. Take one thing that they really like and then negotiate and say, you can have one of this and one of this. And that's how we've gotten Harmony to try new things.
Yeah.
But they're more willing to do that if there's something that they like
Yeah.
and then something else that they don't know or they haven't tried before.
Right. Absolutely. Always having, it's a great point.
presenting those foods together.
Whether you do it pretty, more clearly like that, more firmly, or whether it's on their plate and you put a preferred food and then food that's maybe a little bit of a challenge. You never want just the challenge food.
Yeah, we just make it a game, so it's like you can have one of this, and then you have to have one of this, because if you don't, Harmony will take the whole bowl of chips and run.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be her food group.
Yeah, Jacob's the same, except half the bag of chips winds up on my bedroom floor.
Well, Well, they're all running away from his mouth, right?
I'm all scared. Anyone else?
Okay, well, thank, oh, yeah.
My question is, so if there's a food that you've established that the child doesn't prefer, without the food chaining, like you don't, like, should you say this is what's for dinner, you have to eat it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that balance, right? Because you also, as a parent, you don't want to be making multiple meals at the same time, right? One meal for the child. I think as much as you can, going back to what we talked about, you don't want the whole plate to be a challenge, right? Because that's going to put them into fight or flight. Like, I think of a whole plate of smoked eel. That would be a lot, right? But you can say, so another great rule of thumb I've heard is, parents, you have control over what you put on the plate, general rule of thumb. And they have control of what they put in their mouth, right? So you can say, this is what we're all having for dinner, right? But then maybe also, can you put some other foods on there? Maybe there's a side dish or something that's also a little more preferred, right? Because I do think it's important to kind of say, this is what we're having, but also work with how challenging that food is, right? If they can't even tolerate it on their plate, maybe they can put it right beside their plate. If the smell's strong, can we cover it? And then we're slowly working to having it be closer to the plate, right? Just depending on that. Yeah. So since this is our first time doing this, we would love just really briefly some feedback from you guys about how we can improve it for next time and the next group of parents. I know that might be a lot at the end of a long presentation, but I feel like feedback from you guys is the most helpful. Changes you would make. It's a lot of information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hope it wasn't, yeah.
It's a very diverse subject for an hour and a half.
It's really diverse.
You're right. That
Yeah.
was the challenge.
So our hope was to give some ideas, some strategies, and then also general sense of, okay, at what point do I kind of go and have a little more of a targeted conversation with my pediatrician? What point do I get a little more help from our, ECSE team? And
If
what's that
anything,
like?
if you guys have, things that come up later, like, oh, they should have mentioned this, just, you can email, either if you have our emails directly, feel free, or, Anna at the front desk, and just say, I have a message for Rosa and Lauren.
And the OT team.
And, yeah, we're the OT team.
We're the whole team.